Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you on another Facebook Live. This one is a little bit of a quicker response. I am Barbara Peña. I'm the Assistant Director of Outreach. I'm here tonight with our Associate Executive Director, Justin Tullius. We are going to talk about President Trump's executive order that he signed just today. And we'll sort of take you through what that means. We'll parse out some of the more important legal aspects of it. We'll talk a little bit about what we've seen to this point with the zero tolerance policy. We'll talk about the response that RAICES has had to that. And then if we have the opportunity, we'll be able to field a few questions. So I think we'll go ahead and get started and maybe just dive right in. Justin, maybe we could start by catching the audience up, talking a little bit about zero tolerance and maybe what that looks like and how we've seen families separated from one another.
Sure. Well, exactly as you said, this all started with zero tolerance, a policy that the Trump administration announced, where it basically made a decision to prosecute parents who were seeking protection here in the United States, crossing the border, seeking protection as refugees, decided to prosecute them with criminal charges, and from there justifying or trying to justify the policy of separating families. So that's where we started, and I think, you know, a lot of folks seeing this order are saying, look, these families are staying together now because that's part of the order, right? And I think the problematic thing that we need to look at there is the President Trump's order says he's going to keep families together now, right? He's going to prosecute the parents, treat them as if they're somehow criminals for seeking protection in the United States. Instead of separating families, he's going to keep them together. But when you read the order, all you have to do is read and say that he's ordering them to be detained. So instead of separating families, which should never happen, he's now directing the government to detain parents and children together in immigration internment camps, which is also something that should never happen.
Right, and I think that's important because for us to be able to go through what the executive order is really saying, this is not ending family detention. Family detention, which of course we know doesn't work and continues to harm families and is really a way to criminalize asylum seekers. This is sort of extending that policy. So we're saying now families will remain together, but they're still going to be detained. Can you maybe take us through some of the more significant pieces of language? I know that one of the things that, you know, maybe people were sort of thinking we could breathe a sigh of relief was that we will no longer see children forcibly taken from their parents' arms. But I don't know that with this executive order, we find ourselves in a much better world.
Right. Well, one of the things I think that's produced so much outrage throughout communities, not just here in Texas, but around the country, is this theme of loss. And we've seen the theme of loss of children to their parents, right?
Right.
At the border, when they are ripped from each other, separated. And we've had so many moms and dads that we work with say, my child was lost to me. I've lost my child. Where is my child, right? They were taken away hundreds of miles away to some type of shelter or other detention center where they don't know where they are. So that theme of loss, I think, between a parent and a child is what has been so outrageous to all of us and shocked the conscience of so many people. Again, I think that loss is continuing here. And now what we're looking at is there's been so much of a challenge for our family members to find each other, right? We've worked a lot on that to help parents find their children and vice versa. Now we're going to have families detained together in these internment camps, and the concern is that now the entire family gets lost. Because as Barbara said, exactly as you said, zero tolerance is continuing. There's no end to zero tolerance. In this very order in front of us, the Trump administration is going to continue prosecuting parents through the zero tolerance policy. And the concern is that after those parents finish their criminal proceeding, after they get prosecuted with that kind of mass justice, right, where we've seen dads or moms lined up in a line, all pleading together right in front of a judge. When they finish that prosecution and they're now detained together with their children, there's a concern that that family is going to get lost to their other loved ones, lost to advocates, lost to the ability to find legal services. And one thing I think is really important about that question that you posed is, in the order, the president is directing the Department of Defense to utilize existing locations, existing facilities to detain these families. So we have the specter of families disappearing into some kind of military-based facilities. We don't know if those are going to be. It's hard enough for us, for attorneys, or for family members, loved ones, to find anyone who's in a regularized detention facility. And now we have the specter of them disappearing into some kind of system that doesn't exist yet and that we can't even fully locate or know what that's going to be.
And I think that's a really important and crucial point to make clear to anyone watching this evening that this is really not a victory. It seems as though the way the executive order is written, that though the families are going to be kept together, there seems to be no presumption of release for these families.
That's exactly right. And one reason we have a copy of the actual order right here is we want folks to read it. You can Google it online and just read exactly what the order says. And I do understand with the outrage that we've seen, right? Hearing that families won't be separated anymore, there's a sense of victory, a sense of something that sounds positive. But when you read that, it's not a victory. You're exactly right. So not only does the order say that families should be kept together with unity in detention, but on page 2 of the order, it goes ahead and orders the government, the Secretary of Homeland Security, to maintain custody of alien families during the pendency of their immigration proceedings. So we don't know exactly how it's going to be interpreted yet, but in addition to the fact that no child should ever be in detention, asylum-seeking families who are refugees should be allowed to go through this very grueling, daunting process in the community where they have support. They should not be detained, and that's exactly what we're reading here, that the president intends for them to go through that really grueling, and Barbara, your team knows about this. I mean, you know this in and out better than anybody, having worked in the family detention prison camps in Carnes here right outside of San Antonio. We're going to be seeing that times whatever factor, we don't know, right?
Right.
Increasing time in detention, increasing numbers of detained families, and probably increased detention sites.
And thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's a really important parallel for us to draw right now, because what we are seeing and what we have seen based on the Carnes Pro Bono Project model, which our team of attorneys, trained volunteers, law students, social work students will go to the Carnes Detention Center and work with families, women, and children as they prepare for their credible fear interviews. These are almost all asylum-seeking families. Some may find relief under Convention Against Torture. Most of these families, though, are here seeking refuge. As you say, they have expressed a fear of returning to their homeland. And it's not a crime to seek asylum. We should not criminalize or penalize families who are here, in many instances, fleeing for their lives, attempting to escape situations that for the average person in this country are unimaginable. So this is already a very difficult set of circumstances for these families to face. Going through these proceedings, it's not easy, it's very complicated, and they require significant legal framework and really sort of shepherding through the system to just be able to understand, because as you know, it's a very complex system, and it is unfortunately stacked against families that are here seeking asylum. So for us to point that out, I think, is really significant and something that we want everyone watching at home to be able to understand. It seems as though with this executive order, those waters have become even murkier. Without the presumption of release, we're sort of left wondering, as you know, asylum proceedings can drag on and on and on. Would there be at some point where a family would be released, and under what circumstances would that happen? Or is this sort of an indefinite detention? One of the things that is so troubling is this idea that as these detention centers sort of fill up with families, where else are they going to go? So if we're suddenly finding ourselves in a position where we are going to see families detained on military bases, that opens up a whole other set of problems. And I think that it's through a very careful examination of the language and having attorneys sort of parse that out for the rest of us. I think that's one of the first steps to being able to understand this. What else from the executive order should we be paying attention to? What else do we need to, as advocates, as concerned citizens, what else do we need to be paying attention to in here?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that, you really don't need an attorney for, right, is if you read the order, one thing the president directs the attorney general to do is ask for a modification, a change in the Flores settlement agreement. And the Flores settlement agreement is a settlement agreement between the U.S. government and folks who had brought litigation, who had brought a case up against the government based on the way they were treating immigrant children. Mm-hmm. And in that case, the settlement protects children. It guarantees them certain rights, immigrant children that the government interacts with, that they want to detain. And it recognizes that children have certain rights. There's certain kinds of conditions that children are entitled to, and the government has to respect that. It can't lock up children in a detention camp, treat them as if they were adults. I think it's problematic, for anybody reading this, that if there's a modification needed of that core settlement agreement to be able to do what the president wants, that's already a huge red flag. So I think we can expect to see certainly massive violations of children's rights when they're detained with parents, as well as the rights of the parents. And I think that that's a huge problem. We need to definitely, as you said, keep an eye on this and monitor it very closely as communities. Lawyers definitely, we have our place. And I think that we're here on RAICES certainly to help provide information as much as we can to the community. But I think it's that community outpouring of outrage that's been so powerful up to now on family separation. We need to look to and count on that same outpouring of outrage against this increased detention of families, to call on our elected officials and to have communities really step up and express that. And I think one thing, Barbara, one question for you, in terms of a response, right, what do we do now? I mean, family detention has been very much a Texas issue. It's a national issue, but for us here in San Antonio, we're, in our backyard are the two large family detention facilities really in the country. And your program where you work with volunteers, you've mentored volunteers, you've had so many folks come to ask you for training and how that they can get involved and support, help these families get released. RAICES has been doing this work for 4 years, so our family detention program is very, I think, expert in what we do. You guys, I think, are national experts in this. When you read this order and you saw an increase of family detention, which you've been fighting against with your team for all these years, trained so many folks who have come into San Antonio and done this work, what did you think? What were your thoughts when you first read this and you saw this expansion on the horizon?
I think my first reaction was one of fear. What happens to due process? Where do these families who already find themselves in a very precarious legal position, where do they go from here to be able to seek relief? It's very difficult, even with a program that's as well established as the Carnes Pro Bono Project, which has been our model for the last 4 years here. And today, Manoj Govindaya did announce the Families Together Pro Bono and Post-Release Project, which is solely concentrating on family reunification. As we sort of examine the detention centers and look at that, and even with expert help and even with a tremendous amount of help, and we've seen an astonishing increase in the amount of pro bonos that are willing to come in and work, roll up their sleeves, and help us assist these families. You have to wonder, though, as difficult as it is to access the detention centers, if you start taking families to these sort of off-site places, it's very difficult to gain access to a detention center, even if you are an attorney, even if you do have credentials. Getting onto a military base is a whole other matter. If there are any other sites, and it seems like the executive order clears the room for housing families pretty much almost anywhere that the government deems suitable, then we're looking at a whole other set of problems, because now we already have issues with access to justice, but now that is compounded even more so. And being able to get trained attorneys, trained volunteers into those off sites, it becomes very difficult to try and maintain the network that we worked so hard to develop. I think people are very eager and wanting to lend their services, whether they are law students, whether they're pro bonos. We have so many social work students, and that is going to become increasingly more difficult. And as those families become more isolated, that access, which is already so slim, that access to due process begins to shrink, then we have to ask ourselves, what is happening to the asylum process overall?
Yeah, so we've got a landscape that we're just beginning to figure out how this is going to look. In the meantime, as you said, we're still dealing with zero tolerance,
right.
Meaning the government is still railroading parents into a criminal process, right, when they come to the United States seeking refuge. We are still, at this moment, seeing family separations, right? So we don't know how this order is going to start playing out. And so in the meantime, we, with our partners and RAICES here in Texas, we're going to absolutely continue to work with separated families. Whatever the Trump administration does to start putting this order into effect, we still have, we went yesterday to the Pearsall Detention Center to visit 19 parents right outside of San Antonio who had been forcibly separated from their children. We saw about 7 because everybody else had been transferred to some other ICE detention facility, another hundreds of miles away. So we'll continue to do that work. We'll continue to work in our family detention project and definitely relying on a lot of community support and volunteers for that. I think a lot of folks have asked us, as they see this, people are horrified. People, I think, as they become familiar with this order, are seeing, hey, this is something we wanted, which is keeping families unified, but it's everything else we didn't want. We were not asking for families to be in internment camps, detained, in order to keep them unified. When we said that our cities are communities of refuge, we didn't mean that we wanted the Trump administration to hold parents and children together in a camp, right? That's not what we meant. That's what people are saying. So I think a question a lot of folks have is, speaking for myself, I'm a lawyer, right? I can go to court. I can represent my clients. We can make our asylum case. I can help them as best possible to navigate that extremely complicated set of asylum laws that families have to go through. But one thing that I've found in my own practice is how important it is to have that community support for my clients, right? And our clients tell us that. They say, hey, we're very glad that we have legal representation. We need that. We couldn't have gone through this case in many cases without that. But we've had a lot of clients that we represent tell us what's also important is, and if anything more important, is to see that the community here is on our side, that the community stands up for us. They recognize that people that are seeking asylum, that are seeking protection for their children and themselves, that those people are the same as us here, right? That they find welcoming communities here. So one thing that a lot of folks are asking us is, I'm outraged by this order too. So what can we do? Like, what can folks do who live in communities here in Texas and around the U.S.?
So I think one of the most effective ways to be able to get involved is, of course, to join our action network. We are always looking for volunteers. We're always looking for pro bono help. It can be as simple as someone who has language skills. Certainly the majority of our clients do come from the Northern Triangle. Many of them are Spanish speakers, but asylum seekers come from all over the world. So if you possess a language skill, we absolutely could use that. We always have a need for translators. And of course, we need in-person help at the various detention centers. The best way to do that is to send your information to volunteer at raicestexas.org, and we can connect you with the appropriate program. Tell us a little bit about your skills, and we will find something for you to do. The other thing I want to mention quickly, we're running up against the 20-minute mark here, is that you touched on something really important, and that's community involvement. We've worked really hard in the last couple of years to make sure that our approach when working with vulnerable populations, with newly arrived families, that we're looking at things from a holistic perspective, that we're not just focusing on the legal services, which absolutely is huge. Getting out of a place like Carnes or Pearsall is a major feat. But once a family does move on to post-release life, that's really only the beginning. They still have to maintain their ICE check-ins. If mom or dad is released with a grillete or an ankle monitor, that's a separate set of check-ins. But we have a very strong accompaniment network that will assist families with accompanying them to those ICE check-ins. We know that that's something that's important for families when they're feeling unsafe. We also want to make sure that social services are available as families embark on that new post-release life. So here, for those folks that are local to San Antonio or the San Antonio area, every Tuesday night we are hosting a series of support groups for immigrant families, for newly arrived families, for the undocumented community. You can reach out to us also at the volunteer email for more information about that. That is through a partnership with Our Lady of the Lake University. So we're very proud of that, because we know that one of the ways to help families succeed is with that holistic approach, where it's not just legal services, but also social services.
Right, and you're right. I mean, I think that's something that's been so important to the families that we see. That ICE check-in or going to immigration court for families that do gain their release, that's something that's terrifying. And that ICE check-in can make the difference between whether the person shows up at their local ICE office and gets detained and potentially deported versus getting more time to go through the process they need to here in the community.
Absolutely.
I think that's all important.
And then one final point that I do want to mention is tomorrow we've got another Facebook Live event. For those of you who joined us earlier, our response was so overwhelming that we actually had to migrate from one platform to another. So tomorrow we are just going to do another Facebook Live. We are talking about our National Immigrant Support Network. This is a launch of a new program for us. We are talking about post-release services. We will have more of our social services folks on hand for that tomorrow to be able to bring you those updates and talk about that. And it is going to be 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. And we will provide the link to that on our Facebook page.
Great. And so I think, yeah, just to close out, as you said, Barbara, there was a massive outcry against separating families, and for good reason. We've seen those images of children at the border. Those folks who have worked with us in our projects have met these families in person and known that horror that families go through. And I think what we have to keep in mind with this new order is, at every stage, the Trump administration has tried to shift what's normal, right? First saying, look, we have to detain families that are seeking asylum. Well, there's no requirement to do that. There's no need to do that, right? That doesn't have to be the normal. Then saying, well, some law passed by somebody else requires us to separate families. Well, that wasn't true either, right? And I think what we've seen throughout this strategy is using this outrage so that when the Trump administration now announces the end to separations, that the rest of the advocacy community, those who are seeking asylum themselves, families, their loved ones, their supporters in our communities, will be begging for family detention, right? Begging the Trump administration, well, please now detain families just so you don't separate them. Right. And I think that's what we have to 100% reject. And I think we're going to see that, and we're going to have to count on that equally massive rejection of this, where communities say, look, we absolutely condemned separating families. That's not who we are. But detaining moms, dads, and children together in immigration internment camps is not who we are either.
That's exactly right. And this just happened today. Our attorneys are going into detention centers across the state of Texas every single day. And as we know more, we certainly will share more. That's one of our, that's for us is very critical. We want to make sure that we're shedding light in dark places, and that we're making that information available to the public so that people understand what this really looks like. So we'll continue to do that. And we thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we will speak with you again soon. Thanks.
Thanks, Phil, for joining us.